The first time Mara saw the Vampire King's son convulsing on the marble floor, she thought he was dying. The boy's small body shook in hard, violent waves, his teeth chattering so loudly the sound bounced off the glass ceiling of the royal baths. Soap water spread under him in a pale puddle, soaking his thin nightshirt. For a second, Mara stood frozen with a heavy copper basin in her red hands, the sharp scent of lavender and iron burning her nose, until something inside her snapped and she ran to him. No one else moved. The noble women in their perfumed steam drew back with disgust, silk sleeves hiding their faces. The servants lined against the walls stared, hands gripping their own aprons but not daring to step forward. In this palace, touching the king's heir without permission meant punishment, maybe worse. They all knew the stories about the Vampire King's temper. But as the boy's pupils rolled back and his fingers scraped helplessly at the cold stone, Mara felt her own fear swallowed by a heavier ache that squeezed her chest. She dropped to her knees so fast they slammed against the wet floor. "Hey, little one, I've got you," she whispered, even though she knew he couldn't hear over his own gasps. Without thinking, she lay down beside him on the marble and wrapped her arms around his shaking body, pulling him against her chest. The cold from the floor bit through her worn dress, but she pressed her cheek to his damp hair and held him as if he were the last warm thing on earth. But before we continue, I want to invite you to something very special. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. And comment below which city you're watching from. Now, let's continue. His name was Elias. He was 7, small for his age, with a pale face and large gray eyes that hardly ever looked at anyone directly. Mara had seen him from afar, clinging to his tutor's cloak in the corridors, shoulders hunched as if trying to disappear. The court whispered that something was wrong with him, that the vampire prince was fragile, cursed, made weak by some dark mistake in his blood. Some said it was punishment, others just called it shame. Mara knew what it was to be called weak. She had grown up in the lower quarter, where the river smelled of dye and smoke, and the sky was always a dull gray above leaning roofs. Her mother had scrubbed noble linens until her fingers cracked. Her father had gone out one winter night to look for work and never returned. When royal recruiters came looking for laundresses, Mara had stepped forward so her younger siblings would have one less mouth to feed. Since then, she had washed sheets stained by secrets, hauling buckets until her shoulders burned even in her sleep. Now, lying on the floor with Elias pressed to her, Mara forgot every rule drilled into her since entering the palace. His tremors rolled through his small body into hers, each jolt making her ribs ache. His breath came in short bursts that tickled her neck. "You're safe," she murmured, rubbing circles between his shoulder blades the way her mother used to calm her brother when nightmares left him shaking. Steam wrapped around them like a white curtain, blurring the staring faces into shadows. Then the air changed. It grew colder, heavier, as if the room itself had decided to hold its breath. Mara felt it before she heard the steps, slow, controlled, echoing across marble with the weight of someone who had never once needed to hurry. Noble women dropped into curtsies. Servants bowed so low their foreheads almost touched the wet floor. Mara turned her head just enough to see the tall figure framed in the archway, the Vampire King. Lucian was taller than the stories. He wore no shining crown, only a dark coat that moved like midnight ink around his boots. His hair, black and straight, was tied at the nape of his neck, and his skin had the pale stillness of stone under moonlight. His eyes swept the room once, then stopped on the sight before him. His heir wrapped in the arms of a laundress, stretched on the floor like a discarded rag. Something unreadable flickered across his sharp features, but his voice, when it came, was calm and low. "Everyone out," he said. The command was no louder than a normal sentence, but it rolled through the baths like thunder. Cloaks rustled, buckets clanged, footsteps scraped in hurried retreat. Within moments the chamber emptied, leaving only the drip of water, the echo of the king's breathing, the wild thud of Mara's heart, and the soft, uneven breaths of the boy still clinging to her dress. Mara did not move. If she stood up, she might drop him. If she let go, the shaking might return stronger. So she stayed on the floor, half-soaked, dress clinging to her knees, arms firm around him. Elias's convulsions had faded to small shivers. His fingers were twisted in the thin fabric of her apron, as if he refused to be separated from her. She could smell his hair, soap, smoke from torches, and underneath it all that faint metallic sweetness that marked the ancient bloodline in his veins. The king's boots stopped just beside her. From where she lay, Mara could see the edge of his jaw clenched tight, and a thin, pale scar at his throat, like a line of silver. The silence stretched so long that the blood rushing in her ears began to sound like waves. She squeezed her eyes shut once, preparing herself for whatever would come. "Did anyone tell you," Lucian asked at last, his words soft but sharp as glass, "that touching the air without permission is punishable by death?" Mara swallowed. Her tongue felt like dry cloth. "Yes, Your Majesty," she answered, her voice barely more than a breath. "They told me." She hesitated, then tightened her hold on Elias. But he was alone, and he was shaking so much I thought he would hurt himself. Lucian crouched beside her until his face was level with hers. His eyes were a strange, stormy gray, close enough that she could see faint red threads along the edges. For a brief, dizzy second, Mara had the wild impression that he was looking past her wet hair and patched dress, straight into every memory she carried of holding a trembling child on a dirt floor in a leaking house. His gaze slid to Elias, whose cheek now rested calmly against her collarbone. "What are you doing, Laundress?" the king asked. "Keeping him warm," Mara said, her arms tightening without her noticing. "Showing him he's not alone when his body betrays him." She drew in a slow breath, chest pressing against the boy. Sometimes, when someone holds you, the shaking stops faster. Lucian studied her in silence. A small muscle ticked in his cheek. The steam from the baths curled around his shoulders, turning his outline into something almost unreal, like a statue come to life. Mara waited for the shout, for the call to the guards, for the cold hand of fate closing around her throat. Instead, the king did something no one in the Night Kingdom would have believed if they had seen it with their own eyes. He lowered himself onto the wet floor beside them. Lucian had not sat on the floor for anyone in decades. The marble was cold, the steam thick, the scent of lavender still clinging to the air, and yet the vampire king lowered himself without hesitation, settling beside his son and the laundress, as if this were the only place he was meant to be. Mara felt her breath hitch. Elias stirred at the subtle shift of weight, turning his face slightly toward the cool fabric of his father's coat, though he didn't yet open his eyes. For a long moment, Lucian said nothing. Mara could hear the faint hum of torches outside the chamber and the slow dripping of water along the stone walls. His presence changed the nature of the silence. It became heavier, more intimate, but not frightening. Lucian watched his son with an expression she had never seen on him. Not rage, not coldness, but a shadow of something painfully human. "When did this begin?" he asked quietly. Mara blinked, unsure he was speaking to her. The shaking?" she whispered. Lucian nodded once. "I don't know, Your Majesty. This was the first time I've seen it this close." She swallowed as Elias's breathing deepened against her chest. "He was alone when it started. Everyone panicked." Lucian's jaw tightened. "Everyone always panics around him." Mara hesitated. "Because they're afraid of you?" The king turned his head toward her slowly, and she felt heat climb her neck. She shouldn't have said that. She shouldn't have said anything. But instead of anger, Lucian's gaze held an unsettling, exhausted honesty. "No," he murmured. "They panic because they don't understand him." Elias shifted again, a soft whimper breaking from his throat. Mara instinctively pulled him closer, and Lucian watched her arms tighten around the boy with something like astonishment, as if he couldn't quite grasp that someone would touch his son without recoiling. Mara's voice softened. "This wasn't fear," she said. "It looked like exhaustion, like he was trying so hard not to feel something." Lucian closed his eyes briefly. "He fights it until his body gives out." "What does he fight?" The king did not answer at once. He looked down at his son, at the sweat still clinging to the fine hairs along his forehead, at the slight tremor that remained in his small hands. Then, with a breath that sounded almost reluctant, he said, "Hunger." Mara's stomach tightened. "Hunger. but not the kind she had known on the muddy streets. This was the hunger bred into the oldest bloodlines of the Night Kingdom, the craving that made nobles fear their own shadows. "He's too young," Lucian continued, his voice lower now. "Too gentle for what we are. His body rejects the call. It shakes him apart every time the instinct rises." A thick ache settled under Mara's ribs. She brushed Elias's damp hair back from his face, feeling the boy's breath warm against her collarbone. "He's frightened," she whispered, "and he thinks he has to hide it." Lucian's eyes went to her hand, then to her face. "He's never let anyone touch him during an episode. Not even me." Mara stilled. "Never?" Lucian shook his head once, slowly. "He withdraws from everyone. Tutors, royal physicians, even the council. He shuts down. He won't let me get close when it happens." Mara glanced down at the boy curled against her. His fingers were still knotted in her apron, refusing to let go even in sleep. "Then why now?" Lucian's gaze softened in a way that startled her. "That is what I am trying to understand." For a few breaths, they simply stayed there. The boy's heartbeat steadied. The warmth of his small frame seeped into Mara's arms. The marble beneath them soaked through her clothes, but she didn't shift. Elias needed stillness. He needed warmth. He needed what no one in the palace had ever thought to give him. "You soothed him," Lucian murmured, "with nothing more than your arms." Mara felt a flush rise at her throat. "I didn't think. I just acted. That is precisely what no one else here does." Mara lowered her voice. "He shouldn't be alone when he goes through this." Lucian looked at her with an unreadable expression, as if weighing a decision older than the kingdom itself. After a long moment, he asked, "What is your name, Laundress?" "Mara, Mara," he repeated, the syllables rolling off his tongue with unexpected gentleness. "You will stay." Mara's breath froze. "Stay? At the palace, near him, when he sleeps, when he trains, when he wakes." Lucian's tone held no room for refusal, yet no threat either. "He trusts you. That is rare, unthinkable even." Mara shook her head. "Your Majesty, I am just a laundress. They will say nothing," Lucian cut in, calm but absolute. "I decide what is spoken within these walls." She stared at him, feeling her pulse thrum at her throat. She had never imagined speaking with a king. She had never imagined challenging one. And yet something in his eyes, the quiet strain, the isolation, the fierce longing to protect a child he didn't know how to reach, broke something open in her chest. "Why me?" she whispered. Lucian lowered his eyes toward his son. "Because he stopped shaking," he said simply. "Because he rested." He paused, his voice softer. "Because he clung to you like he had finally found a place where he could breathe." The steam slowly thinned as the room cooled. Mara felt Elias's breathing deepen into long, steady rhythms. Carefully, she shifted to sit upright, pulling the boy into her lap. Lucian watched every movement, as if mapping the way she held him. "You speak to him gently," Lucian said. "You hold him without fear. You protect him without hesitation." He looked directly into her eyes. "Those are qualities this palace has forgotten." Mara swallowed hard. "I don't belong in a place like this." "Perhaps," Lucian murmured, "this place needs someone who does not belong." The weight of his words settled deep in her chest. She looked down at Elias, whose small fingers finally relaxed, no longer gripping her apron. "Will he be all right?" she asked. Lucian's voice softened with a gravity that startled her. "He will be, if he has someone to anchor him." Mara brushed the back of her hand along Elias's temple. "Then let me be that anchor, for as long as he needs one." Lucian's eyes widened, not in authority, but in something fragile, almost grateful. When he spoke, the words were quiet, but they struck through the chamber like a vow. "Then his life is about to change," he said, "and so is yours." When Mara carried Elias back to his chambers, the palace looked different. The torches crackled softly along the stone corridors, casting long orange shadows that swayed as she walked. The scent of damp stone mixed with the faint sweetness of polished wood. She had passed through these hallways thousands of times, arms full of linens, mind focused on staying invisible. But now, each step felt heavy with eyes, hidden ones, curious ones, resentful ones. Lucian walked beside her in silence. He didn't interfere, didn't demand to carry his son. He let Mara hold the boy, who slept curled around her like a small animal seeking warmth. Once or twice, Elias whimpered, and Mara soothed him with a soft hum she barely remembered from her childhood. Each time, Lucian listened, as though memorizing the melody. When they reached the prince's chamber, Lucian opened the carved darkwood door for her. The room was dim, lit only by a silver lantern glowing near the bed. It cast a pale circle of light over thick velvet blankets and shelves filled with carved wooden animals, wolves, deer, ravens, with delicate fangs etched in detail, a child's world shaped by an ancient kingdom. Mara gently laid Elias on the bed. She tucked him under warm layers, smoothing the blanket over his chest. His eyelashes fluttered, and she felt his hand reach toward her again, searching blindly. Without thinking, she took it. His fingers curled around hers. Lucian watched that small gesture with an expression that tightened something in Mara's throat. "He sleeps easier with you," the king said quietly. She kept her voice low. "He's just a child, Your Majesty. He needs someone with him. Every child does." Lucian looked around the room, as if seeing it for the first time. Its grandeur, its emptiness. "He has always been surrounded by people," Lucian murmured, "but never held." Mara exhaled slowly. "Then he must feel very alone." Lucian flinched, barely visible. "He is the heir to a kingdom that expects him to be stronger than anyone his age. That kind of expectation does not leave room for weakness." "It isn't weakness," Mara said, turning to face him. "It's fear." Lucian looked at her with a sharp intensity. "You speak boldly." Mara felt heat creep up her neck. "Forgive me." His gaze softened. "Do not apologize for speaking the truth." The room settled into a fragile quiet. Elias's breathing deepened, steady and rhythmic. Mara slowly released his hand and stepped away, but Lucian raised a hand in a small gesture. "Stay," he said. Mara froze. "Your Majesty?" "I wish to speak." So she stayed. Lucian walked toward the window, where moonlight poured in like liquid mercury over his shoulders. For a moment, he looked less like a king and more like a man hollowed by years of silent burdens. "His mother," he began slowly, "died giving birth to him." Mara's heart gripped. "I'm sorry." Lucian nodded once, a movement so controlled it bordered on painful. "She was human. A secret marriage." He paused, voice growing quieter. "When Elias was born, there were complications. He carried both bloodlines. The palace whispered theories. Some called it a curse, others a mistake." Mara moved closer, only a step. "And what do you call it?" Lucian turned, and the vulnerability in his eyes startled her. "A miracle," he said. "A fragile one." He looked down, hands clasped behind his back. "I have protected him with walls, with guards, with silence, yet none of that kept him safe from his own body." His voice cracked just once. "I do not know how to help him." Mara felt something shift inside her chest. She had seen nobles boast, threaten, belittle, but she had never seen a man like Lucian. Power carved into his bones, looked defeated by helpless love. "You're helping him now," she said softly. Lucian lifted his eyes to hers, as if searching for proof. "You let him rest," Mara continued. "You let him be held when he needed it. That's something he won't forget." Lucian studied her face for a long, breath-held moment. A quiet certainty formed between them, fragile but undeniable. "You understand him," he said. "I understand fear," Mara answered, her voice steady. "And I understand what it is to hide it." Lucian stepped closer. The lantern light reflected faintly in his eyes, turning them silver. "Mara," he said, her name soft on his tongue. "Stay with him tonight. If he wakes, I want you nearby." Mara hesitated. "Your Majesty, the palace will talk." "Let them," Lucian replied, voice firm but gentle. "My son's well-being matters more." Mara nodded. "I will stay." Relief flickered in his eyes, quiet, subtle, but unmistakable. Lucian walked toward the door, then paused. "If you need anything," he said, "call for me. I will be close." Mara bowed her head. "Thank you." He held her gaze for a long heartbeat, an entire unspoken conversation in a single look, then stepped into the corridor and closed the door behind him. The room felt quieter without him, but warmer too. Mara sat in a chair near the bed, watching Elias sleep. His small hand twitched once, and she reached out instinctively, placing her palm over his. He settled instantly. Mara's throat tightened at the simple truth. He had been waiting his whole life for a touch meant only for comfort, not duty. As she watched the child breathe, she felt a strange sensation tug at her chest, an early sense that something enormous had shifted tonight, not just for Elias, not just for her, but for the king himself. Outside the window, the moon shone like an open eye, and Mara, exhausted yet strangely awake, did not yet understand that by choosing to hold the prince on that cold marble floor, she had stepped into a destiny that would change the course of the Night Kingdom forever. Mara woke to the soft rustle of fabric and the faint smell of warm iron drifting through the dim morning light. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then she saw Elias, curled on his side, breathing steadily, his small hand still resting over hers, and everything from the night before came rushing back. She pulled her hand away gently, careful not to wake him. The room was quiet, lit by a pale gray glow sneaking between the heavy curtains. But the moment she stood, she realized someone else was there. Lucian. He stood near the doorway, arms crossed, watching her. Not with anger, not with suspicion, but with something close to contemplation, as if she were a puzzle that had started rearranging the pieces of his world. "You didn't rest," he said softly. Mara wiped her palms down her apron. "I didn't want to sleep while he might need me." Lucian's gaze moved to the boy on the bed. He didn't wake once. "That's good," Mara whispered. Lucian took a slow step closer. "It's more than good. It's new." Mara didn't know what to say to that. She simply nodded. He studied her face a moment longer, then lowered his voice. "When he wakes, I want you to stay with him through the morning." Mara hesitated. "Won't the court question that?" "The court questions everything," Lucian said. "But they obey me." She held his gaze. "Your Majesty, people in the palace already look at me differently. Some with anger, some with fear." Lucian's voice grew firmer. "They'll learn to look with respect." Mara almost laughed, softly, disbelievingly. "I'm a laundress." Lucian stepped closer. "You are the only person my son has ever sought comfort from. That is worth more than titles." Mara swallowed. "What will they think of you? Having a laundress stay by the prince's side?" Lucian's expression froze in an unreadable way. "I stopped caring about the court's whispers long ago." A soft groan broke the moment. Elias stirred. His small hand reached blindly toward the space Mara had been sitting in. Before she realized what she was doing, she rushed to him and sat on the edge of the bed. His fingers found hers instantly. His breathing steadied. Lucian watched with a quiet awe that made Mara's cheeks warm. Elias blinked awake slowly, his gray eyes foggy with sleep. When he saw Mara beside him, something gentle flickered across his face, a recognition that held no fear. "Mara," he whispered. She smiled. "Good morning, little one." Lucian stepped closer. "How do you feel?" Elias didn't answer his father. Instead, he leaned into Mara's side, resting his head lightly against her arm. Lucian's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in a complicated, wounded mixture of love and envy and relief. Mara rubbed Elias's back in a slow, soothing motion. "Would you like something warm to drink?" she murmured. He nodded. Lucian motioned to a guard outside. Within minutes, a tray of warm herbal tea and small pieces of soft bread arrived. The aroma of mint filled the room. Mara helped Elias sit up, supporting his back with her hand. She didn't realize Lucian was holding his breath until Elias took the cup from her and drank without trembling. The king exhaled quietly. Mara glanced at him. "He's stronger than he thinks," she said. Lucian met her gaze. "He is stronger than I allowed him to be." Before she could respond, the heavy door burst open. Mara flinched. Lucian's expression snapped into cold authority instantly. A tall woman in a deep crimson gown stormed in. Sharp features, silver hair pinned so tightly it looked painful. Mara's stomach dropped. She didn't know her name, but she had heard about her. Lady Verona, the king's sister, and one of the most feared voices on the royal council. Her eyes narrowed at the sight before her. Mara sitting on the prince's bed, Elias leaning against her. Lucian standing close with his arms relaxed by his sides. "What?" Verona said, her voice slicing the air. "Is this?" Lucian didn't move. "Verona, step outside." "Absolutely not." Verona swept her gaze over Mara like she was a stain on the floor. "Why is a laundress touching the air?" Elias whimpered. Mara felt him flinch, his hand tightening around hers. She pulled him closer. Verona's voice sharpened. "Remove your hands from the prince, girl." Lucian spoke before Mara could react. "She will not." Verona stared at him. "Brother, have you lost your judgment?" "I have regained it," Lucian said quietly. Verona's face contorted in silent fury. "She is human, weak, untrained. She carries no royal blood. This girl, this nobody, has no right to be near the air." Mara felt something burn beneath her ribs. Shame at first, then anger, not for herself, for Elias, who was trembling again under Verona's voice. Lucian stepped forward, shadows gathering behind him like shifting wings. "His trembling worsens when you raise your voice," Verona scoffed. "If he trembles in the presence of authority, he is unfit to rule." Elias's breath hitched. Mara wrapped her arm around his small shoulders. That was it. She couldn't stay silent. "Please stop," Mara said, her voice soft but steady. "You're frightening him." Verona turned slowly toward her, shock flickering across her sharp features as if no one had dared speak back to her in years. "You," she whispered, "are out of line." Lucian stepped between them. Enough. But Verona was far from finished. She pointed a long, jeweled finger at Mara. "Brother, remove this girl immediately. The court already speaks. A laundress sleeping at the prince's side? They call it scandalous, reckless, dangerous." Mara felt cold spread through her limbs. She had expected resistance, but not this level of venom. Elias pressed his face into Mara's side, hiding from Verona. Verona's voice rose. "You will lose the council's loyalty. You will lose the kingdom's trust. Let them leave, if they dare," Lucian interrupted. Verona stared at him, stunned. Lucian's voice lowered to something darker. "I will not force my son to suffer for the sake of appearances." Verona's eyes flashed. "You have grown weak. And you," Lucian said, stepping closer, "have forgotten compassion." Silence. Thick, tense, cold. Verona turned sharply and stormed toward the door. "This is not over." The door slammed behind her, making Elias flinch again. Mara tightened her arms around him. "It's all right," she whispered. Lucian looked at the closed door with an expression that chilled her. Not anger, but a quiet, simmering promise. When he finally turned back to Mara and Elias, his voice was low. "The court will come for you," he said. "They will push, threaten, whisper, and they will try to drive you out." Mara lifted her chin. Her voice was small but certain. "Let them try." Lucian stared at her, stunned, for the first time looking almost humanly unguarded, almost moved. "You protected him," he whispered, "even from my own blood." Mara held Elias close. "And I will again." Lucian took a slow breath, as if steadying something deep inside him. "Then your life," he said quietly, "is about to become far more dangerous than you ever imagined." And neither of them knew yet that danger was already waiting at the palace gates. The palace changed in the days that followed. Mara felt it with every step she took, whispers curling like smoke around her ankles, eyes watching her from behind columns, servants who once greeted her now stiffening as she passed. She had become something she never meant to be, a disruption, a question mark, a threat to the palace's rigid order. But every morning when she entered Elias's chamber and saw him waiting for her, small hands clenching his blanket, gray eyes softening the moment she walked in, she knew she'd endure every whisper, every glare, every danger. On this morning, Elias sat cross-legged on the rug, a wooden wolf figurine in his hands. His hair was still mussed from sleep, and his cheeks held a faint, healthy flush Mara hadn't seen before. "You're early," Mara said gently. Elias nodded. "I didn't shake last night." Her breath caught. "That's wonderful." He held out the wooden wolf shyly. "I carved this. For you." Mara knelt, her eyes stinging. The figurine was rough but careful, its little fangs barely visible. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll keep it safe." When she closed her fingers around it, Elias smiled, Small, fleeting, but real. For him, it was a leap across a chasm. Before she could say more, the door opened and Lucian stepped inside. He wore dark armor embroidered with silver thread, the kind that commanded attention without a single word. Yet the moment he saw his son sitting on the floor beside Mara, the hardness in his posture eased. Elias looked at his father, hesitated, then lifted his arms. Lucian froze. Mara held her breath, slowly, carefully. Lucian knelt and lifted the boy into his arms. Elias tucked his small face against his father's shoulder. Lucian's jaw clenched, not in anger, but in the overwhelming effort to remain composed. Mara looked away to give them a moment. She didn't see the wetness gathering at the corners of the king's eyes. After a long silence, Lucian stood, Elias still in his arms. "Prepare him for the council's ceremony," he said softly. "They want to see him." Mara felt the shift in the air immediately. "Is that safe?" "No," Lucian answered, "but it is necessary. Before we continue, tell me in the comments what you think of this story so far and what you would do in her place. Don't leave the video, because what comes next will give you chills." Mara followed Lucian and Elias to the ceremonial hall. The corridors were colder today. Guards stood at every archway. Murmurs filled the air like restless insects. At the massive doors carved with ancient runes, Lucian stopped. "Mara, come with us." Her heart pounded. "Inside? With the council?" "Yes, but they will speak to you regardless," Lucian interrupted. "Better that you stand beside me." Her breath trembled, but she nodded. The hall was enormous, lit by tall torches whose flames danced a cold blue instead of orange. 12 council members sat upon elevated seats of stone carved with symbols of old bloodlines. At the center stood a long table covered in scrolls, seals, and a bowl of dark water that reflected shifting shadows. As Lucian stepped forward, the council rose, but their eyes held no respect today, only scrutiny. Mara stayed close behind him, feeling every gaze land on her like a blade. "Your Majesty," Lady Verona said sharply, "we did not summon the Laundress." Lucian kept his tone calm. "She is here, at my command." A murmur spread across the hall. Verona's eyes narrowed. "Brother, we have concerns, deep concerns." Lucian lifted Elias so the council could see him. The boy clung to his father's coat, trembling, not from sickness, but from fear of the room. "This is the heir," Verona said, "and your choices endanger him." "Explain," Lucian replied. Verona motioned to the bowl of dark water. "The kingdom has enemies. Whispers grow beyond these walls, wolves stalking for weakness. And what do they see? A king who allows a servant to sleep beside the prince. That servant," Lucian said, "saved his life." "She compromised it," Verona snapped. "She exposes him to the world's mockery." Mara stepped forward before she could stop herself. "Mockery only affects those who value the wrong things." Silence exploded across the hall. Verona turned, disbelief twisting her mouth. "You dare speak in this chamber?" Lucian's voice cut through the air like a blade. "She speaks because I allow it." Verona's nostrils flared. "Brother, this attachment is dangerous. The more the boy relies on her, the weaker he becomes." Mara felt a heat rise under her skin. "He hasn't grown weaker," she said. "He's grown stable. He's grown calmer. He's sleeping through the night. That is not weakness. It is healing." Elias pressed his face deeper into Lucian's shoulder, hiding from the harsh voices. "Look at him," Verona cried, holding his father like a frightened pup. "A future king must stand tall." Lucian took one slow, threatening step toward her. "He is 7. The hall trembled with the weight of his voice. Still, Verona was relentless. "Your Majesty, the union that birthed him was already a scandal. Now you add this? Rumors rise everywhere. Rumors that your loyalty lies with humans, that you prioritize them, that you—" She hesitated. Then the words slipped out like poison. "That you love one." The hall froze. Mara felt the breath leave her body. Lucian's expression didn't change, but the torches in the hall flickered violently as if reacting to the energy in his veins. "You speak carefully from now on," Lucian warned, voice low. Verona smiled thinly. We simply demand what is best for the kingdom. And I demand what is best for my son, Lucian said. The council does not dictate his care. A man at the far end cleared his throat. Your Majesty, your decision has invited tension from the border clans. Lucian stiffened. What tension? Unrest, the man said. They believe a human now influences royal decisions. Some are preparing challenges. Mara's heart tightened. Challenges? Verona leaned forward. The clans say the heir's weakness is a threat, that the throne should not pass to a boy who requires a human's touch to control his blood. Elias trembled. Lucian's eyes grew cold. Elias will rule. Not if the clans overthrow him before he grows, Verona said. Lucian went still. Mara moved without thinking. She placed her hand on Lucian's arm, grounding him, the same way she grounded Elias. The entire council gasped. Lucian didn't pull away. When he turned his head toward her, there was something unspoken in his eyes, something that made her heart pound. Mara, he said softly, take Elias out. She understood. He needed to protect his son from hearing the rest. She nodded. Elias reached for her instantly, and Lucian placed him in her arms with a tenderness so private it almost hurt to witness. As she carried Elias toward the door, she heard Verona's voice rise behind her in a final icy threat. If the clans come for the boy, she said, a laundress will not save him. And Mara understood something she had not understood until this moment. This wasn't just palace gossip. This was the beginning of a coming storm. A storm that wanted the child she now held. A storm that would force her to choose between safety and standing beside the king. And she already knew what she would choose. The palace seemed louder that night. Footsteps echoing in hurried rhythms. Distant voices tense with the kind of fear people tried to hide, but couldn't. Mara felt it the moment she stepped into the corridor outside Elias's chamber. Guards stood at every corner. Torches burned with brighter flames. Even the marble floors felt colder, as if the kingdom itself braced for something it could not yet name. Elias clung to her hand as they walked. His fingers were cold, but his steps were steady. When they reached his room, Mara closed the door behind them, shutting out the palace's trembling heartbeat. Inside, the space felt gentler, quieter, wrapped in warm lamplight. She knelt to meet Elias's eyes. Are you hungry? She asked. He shook his head. Are you tired? He shook his head again, but tears shone at the edge of his lashes. Mara sat beside him on the rug, pulling him into her lap. Talk to me, she murmured. Elias's small voice trembled. Aunt Verona says, the clans will come. Mara felt his breath quiver against her. She likes to scare people, Mara whispered, but she doesn't know everything. She said I'm not strong, Elias whispered, that I can't be a king. Mara cupped his cheeks. Listen to me. Strength isn't loud. It isn't cruel. It isn't about pretending you're not afraid. Strength is waking up every day, even when the world feels heavy. Strength is trying again when you shake. Strength is kindness in a place that has forgotten kindness. Elias blinked at her, tears clinging to his lashes. You, Mara said, pressing her forehead gently to his, are the strongest person I know. His small hands gripped her sleeves, desperate for grounding. Mara wrapped her arms around him, letting him melt into her, letting him breathe. A soft knock echoed through the chamber. Mara, Lucian's voice called quietly. May I enter? She stood, lifting Elias with her. When she opened the door, Lucian stepped inside, and the tension in the air followed him like a shadow. He looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion no sleep could fix, the kind of exhaustion carved by responsibility, fear, and decisions that had no right answer. Is he all right? Lucian asked softly. Mara nodded. Just frightened. Lucian's gaze broke, just for a moment. He knelt, holding his arms open. Elias went to him without hesitation, burying himself against his father's chest. Lucian closed his eyes, his hand steady on the back of his son's head. Something in Mara's heart twisted. Tell me, she said quietly. What is happening? Lucian lifted his gaze to hers. The clans have already moved. Mara's breath caught. Moved how? They've sent riders to the borders, scouts, and messengers demanding I either prove Elias is fit to inherit or allow a challenge for the throne. Mara stared at him, disbelief tightening her throat. He's just a child. Lucian's jaw hardened. Exactly, which is why they target him. They believe a child who struggles with his instincts cannot lead a kingdom. Her anger rose like heat. They think shaking makes him weak? Lucian shook his head slowly. No, they think needing you makes him weak. The truth hit her like a blow. Me? Lucian stood, Elias still in his arms but watching Mara with wide eyes. The clans view human influence as corruption. They think your presence makes Elias vulnerable. They want you gone. Mara stepped closer. And what do you want? Lucian hesitated, not from uncertainty, but from the weight of everything he could not say aloud. I want my son safe, he said at last. Mara swallowed. And you think I put him in danger? Lucian's eyes flashed, sharp and immediate. No, you are the only reason he sleeps, the only reason his episodes ease. You are the one thing that steadies him. He paused. But that is precisely why they target you. Mara felt a chill run down her spine. What will they do? Lucian exhaled. Tonight, nothing. But tomorrow the council meets again. They want to vote on your removal from the palace. Mara can't go, Elias whispered, clinging tighter. Lucian's voice softened. I know. And I won't, Mara said, her voice steady. Lucian looked at her, really looked, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something fragile flicker in his expression. You would stay, he said quietly. Even now? Mara nodded. As long as you want me here. As long as he needs me. For a moment, Lucian couldn't speak. His breath caught, his shoulders lowered, losing a tension he had carried like armor for years. He stepped closer. Elias nestled safely in his arms. Mara, he said, voice lower than she'd ever heard from him. There is something you need to know. Her heartbeat quickened. What is it? Lucian hesitated. She had never seen him hesitate. Finally, he said, the clans believe the shaking is not an illness, but a sign. A sign? Mara asked. Lucian nodded slowly. They believe his instincts awaken differently because his blood is changing, because he is forming a bond. Mara frowned. A bond with who? Lucian stepped closer. Elias lifted his head, looking between them. Lucian's voice dropped to a whisper meant only for her. With you. Mara's breath froze. Lucian continued, barely above a whisper. They believe Elias has begun forming an imprint, a deep, instinctual attachment vampires sometimes develop. A rare bond that settles when someone becomes their anchor. Mara felt her pulse thrum in her ears. But that's between bloodlines, between vampires. Lucian shook his head. Rarely, very rarely, it crosses into humanity. And when it does, it is powerful, inescapable. Mara stared at him. Are you saying Elias is tied to me? Lucian met her gaze with absolute certainty. He doesn't shake when you hold him. He sleeps because you breathe near him. He calms at the sound of your voice. That is not coincidence, Mara. That is a bond forming. Her breath trembled. And the clans know? They suspect, Lucian said. Which is why they fear you. A human anchor is unheard of. They see it as weakness. Mara stepped closer. What do you see it as? Lucian swallowed, his eyes never leaving hers. I see it as the first thing that has saved my son in 7 years. Silence filled the room, soft, heavy, alive with something new. Mara, he whispered, whatever happens tomorrow, I will not let them take you from him. Her throat tightened. And from you? Lucian froze. His lips parted instinctively. But before he could answer, a horn sounded from outside the window, low, urgent, echoing across the palace grounds. Lucian's head snapped toward the sound. Elias trembled in his arms. What was that? Mara whispered. Lucian's expression turned to stone. The first warning, he said. The clans have reached our gates. The warning horn faded into the night, leaving a vibrating silence in its wake, one that settled deep into the stone bones of the palace. Mara felt the sound echo inside her chest. Elias clung to Lucian's collar, trembling, but not with hunger this time, with fear. A child's fear, a human fear, the kind that seeped straight into the soul. Lucian shifted the boy in his arms, his movements smooth but tense. Stay behind me, he told Mara, voice low, controlled, but threaded with urgency. No matter what you hear, No matter what they demand, do not let go of Elias. Mara nodded. I won't. Another horn sounded, closer now. The deep hum rattled the window panes. Outside, shadows moved in lines, torchlight flickering on armor, on the sharp silhouettes of wolf crests and obsidian sigils belonging to the border clans. Their arrival wasn't a warning. It was an announcement. Lucian crossed the chamber in long, powerful strides. He unlocked a small iron cabinet hidden behind a tapestry and withdrew a black cloak lined with silver. He draped it gently over Elias's shoulders, pulling the hood up to shield the boy's pale face. Then he knelt, bringing his eyes level with his son's. You stay with Mara, he whispered. Do you understand? Elias nodded, though his lips trembled. Lucian touched his cheek. No one will take you. Not while I breathe. Mara felt something sharp twist in her chest at the quiet ferocity in those words. Lucian stood, every line of his body shifting into the shape of a king prepared to face war. We go to the great hall. They moved quickly through the corridors, torches flaring under the sudden rush of guards and attendants. The palace seemed to pulse with tension, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. As they passed through the northern archway, Mara saw what had arrived outside the gates. A line of riders, mounted atop horses with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. Clan banners whipped in the wind, deep blues, ash grays, and blood-red insignias. They shouldn't be this close, Mara whispered. They shouldn't, Lucian agreed. But here they are. Inside the great hall, the council was already gathered. Verona stood at the center like a vulture dressed in crimson, her expression carved into cold triumph. At her sides, other council members shifted uneasily. The heavy doors thudded shut behind Mara, Lucian, and Elias. Verona's eyes swept over them. You took too long. Lucian ignored her and guided Mara and Elias to stand beside him at the front of the hall. Whispers rippled across the stone floor like crawling insects when the council saw the laundress holding the boy's hand. Enough, Lucian commanded. Silence fell instantly. Verona stepped forward. Brother, the clans demand a demonstration. They want proof the heir is not defective. Mara stiffened. Defective. The word sliced through her. Lucian's jaw clenched visibly. Elias is not a test to be performed. They disagree, Verona retorted. If you refuse, they will challenge the succession by force. Mara looked at Lucian, her pulse hammering. What kind of demonstration? Verona gestured to the bowl of dark water at the council's table. The surface rippled, reflecting glimmers of faint red light. A purity test. Ancient. Binding. He must show control over his instincts. Her eyes flicked toward Mara with poisonous sharpness. Without relying on the human, Elias's small fingers tightened painfully around Mara's hand. Lucian stepped forward. He is 7. He will not be forced into pain for the entertainment of the clans. Verona smirked. Then the clans will take the boy, claim him as unfit, and name another heir. Lucian's breath hitched. Mara saw it, the fear he never showed anyone, the silent terror of losing his son to a savage tradition, the helplessness of a father trapped between love and duty. Elias pressed into Mara's side. I don't want to do it, he whispered. Mara knelt, taking his cheeks in her hands. Listen to me. You don't have to perform for them. You just have to breathe. If you breathe, you're already winning. He nodded shakily. Lucian watched them, watched the way Elias steadied when Mara touched him, and something changed in his eyes. A realization, a decision. No, Lucian said suddenly, turning toward the council. He will not perform without support. Verona scoffed. If the human touches him during the test, it proves he is weak. Lucian's stare turned to ice. If she touches him during the test, it proves he is anchored. A wave of murmurs exploded across the hall. Verona's expression twisted. You want to claim a human, this laundress, as part of the royal bond? Lucian didn't blink. I do. Mara's breath caught so sharply she felt dizzy. Verona's voice cracked like a whip. That is forbidden. It is rare, Lucian corrected, but not forbidden. Mara's heart hammered as the king turned toward her. His voice was low, steady, unshakable. Mara, Lucian said, will you stand with my son? Officially. Before the clans, before the council, Before the kingdom. Elias looked up at her with wide, terrified eyes, eyes that had trusted her when no one else had. Mara didn't hesitate. Yes, she whispered. I stand with him. Lucian exhaled, and for a fleeting moment, the king looked grateful in a way that nearly broke her. The test began. The council carried the bowl of dark water to the center of the hall. The flames dimmed. Shadows deepened. Elias was placed before the bowl, trembling visibly. Mara knelt behind him, her hands steady on his shoulders. Lucian stood close, a silent wall of protection. Prince Elias, Verona announced, reach into the water. Elias's small hand rose, but trembled violently halfway down. He whimpered. Mara leaned closer. Breathe, just breathe. His fingers touched the water. It hissed. Red light burst upward. The hall gasped. Elias whimpered and tried to pull away, instinct rising in him like a wave. Mara grabbed his hand. Instantly, the water calmed. The red light dissolved into soft silver. The hall went silent. Lucian stared at the bowl, then at Mara, eyes wide with something like awe. Verona recoiled. Impossible! The water glowed gently around Elias's small fingers, no longer rejecting him, no longer testing him. It accepted him, because her hand covered his, because the bond was real, because Mara was his anchor. Lucian stepped forward, voice ringing through the hall like thunder. The air is not weak, he said. He is bonded. He extended his hand toward Mara, and so is the kingdom. The clans had no argument left. The council had no threat to offer. The test had spoken older truth than any of them. Mara felt Elias relax into her arms, tears of relief slipping down his cheeks. Lucian knelt beside them, his hand trembling slightly as he touched Mara's cheek. You saved him, he whispered. No, she whispered back. He saved himself. I just held on. Lucian's eyes softened, and for the first time she saw him not as a king, not as a ruler, but as a man, grateful, tired, and profoundly human where it mattered most. What did you think of the story? Subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who will also be moved today.